Hi everyone, welcome to day 2 of Freelance Business Week. My name is Juniette. I'm from the Miami team, and for the next hour, we will be learning practical legal tips from Kristen Corpion. She's an award-winning attorney with 7 years of legal practice, and she's also the founder of Corp Law. So let's see. Welcome, Kristen. How are you today?
Oh, good morning, good afternoon. I'm doing great. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty excited about your session. So yeah, the session is all yours. We can get started.
All right, thanks so much. Thanks so much for having me. Okay, like Joni had said, my name is Kristen Corpion, and I will be leading a presentation today on avoiding legal landmines, practical tips that I think freelancers, small business owners, and entrepreneurs should be aware of to protect their business. So I have been practicing law for 7 years. I started my career at a big law firm in South Florida, in Miami, representing large companies, Fortune 500 corporations. And at this point, it's been about 3 years since I started my own practice. We are a team of 6, and our law firm is headquartered in downtown Miami. Again, the name of the firm is Corp Law, and we specialize in helping entrepreneurs protect their business. So while I'm a lawyer, I'm not your lawyer. We've got a lot of rules that govern our profession, and if you see lawyers and you're annoyed that they always have to give disclaimers, understand it's just something we've got to do. I'm going to share as much advice with you as I can, as much practical advice as I can, but the reason we've got all these disclaimers and rules is to protect you as a consumer, to ensure that you understand this advice, this general advice I'm giving is general in nature, not specific to you. So keep that in mind as you are receiving these practical tips, and to the extent that you want custom tips specific to you and your business and what you're building, I definitely recommend talking with a firm, whether that's our firm or another one. So some of the other sessions that I've heard, and in business generally, you hear this concept of what is your personal why? And I promise we're going to talk about the law, but I think that it's important to remember that lawyers have a personal why too, right? You've heard a bit about my resume and my background, but what I tend to think is more important about any human being that I meet is, who are they? Why do they get out of bed in the morning? And what's their personal why? And so I'm happy to share mine here. I was raised by a single mom who is currently and was then a small business owner. And I saw throughout my childhood the effort and attention and time that she put into running her business. Now that I've since grown up, and my sister has grown up as well, both of us are also small business owners. And I think that desire and interest in entrepreneurship really came from seeing what our mom built. And so my connection to working with small business owners is more than just intellectual curiosity. I very much feel strongly that the pursuit of entrepreneurship is one of the highest callings that an individual can be drawn to. And I respect it both from the standpoint of the legal complexities that we're going to talk about, and from the standpoint of someone who has been working herself to build a business from the ground up. So that's my why. What are we going to cover today? What I want to do is make sure you come away from this presentation feeling like you've got the right mindset about working with lawyers, that you feel empowered about the role that law plays in entrepreneurship. And I want to make sure that we add some value and provide you with practical tips that you can start applying right now to help your business and to keep your assets protected. So let's dive right in and do that. And let's set the stage. A lot of times we find when we're working with small business owners that They're driving blind in terms of driving their business in different areas of knowledge, right? We all know as business owners, especially when it's a small business, if you're a solo entrepreneur, you got to wear every hat, right? So your tech support one day, your HR one day, you got to pretend to be a business lawyer another day. You're the CEO full time. You're doing a lot of things. And while the clients we work with and the business owners we meet are brilliant and motivated and smart, it's just the case that you don't know what you don't know. And so we want to make sure that we are cognizant of that, and we understand that as we're wearing all these different hats, there are certain things that you need to be aware of as business owners to make sure that the business is protected. So I'm going to help you to take off the blinders a little bit where it comes to understanding the role that law plays in your business. We hear a lot of different objections as attorneys. We've heard the lawyer jokes. We know that the topic of law isn't something that is usually considered the sexiest topic, and we've heard everything under the sun. I'm not going to list all of those objections, but there is one that really stands out to me, and it's the objection that I can't hire a business attorney because, quite frankly, I don't know what they do. I don't know how they could help my business. I feel like this objection and this concern is a fair one. And my firm, Corp Law, tries to do our part to make sure that business owners are educated on this. Any consumer does not like to make a purchase without understanding what they're buying, right? What they're getting. And if you don't know how a business attorney can help you or how an attorney in general can be helpful to you, then it would make sense that that would be an objection to working with one and to getting the help that you need. So let's clarify this initial piece just so we're all on the same page. What do business lawyers do, right? First, we've got to kind of separate this idea, criminal law and civil law. We're talking about civil law, not criminal law, hopefully with your business ever. But in this context of the presentation, we're going to be talking about the civil side of things. And in the civil arena, there are a lot of different types of niches that lawyers can provide services in. Generally speaking, without summarizing each of those niches, a business lawyer, a lawyer in general, helps their client, their target market, solve problems. Lawyers are professional problem solvers and solution finders. That's what we do. In the context of a business lawyer is helping you to protect your empire. A good business lawyer will be trying to do that for you in a way that's cost effective and that adds value to you and your business. Understand that we're talking here both in terms of the offensive and the defensive. So making sure that you have protection on the transactional side. Are your contracts up to speed? But then what happens if you as a business owner need to take action? Someone's not paying you. Someone did something in violation of an agreement you had. You might need to take a little bit more action and pursue them in a lawsuit or take things a step up in order to get the help that you need as a business. So the type of help that a lawyer can provide you in the business context is very wide-ranging. We're going to drill down a little bit on what I think are the top categories that you should be thinking about as a freelancer and small business owner. We're going to talk about today the 3 Ps: property, papers, people. The 3 Ps don't have anything to do with the PPP loan, though I have spoken about that a lot lately. So if you have questions, maybe that would be the topic of a different presentation. Here, we're just categorizing this into different groups to help you wrap your head around some of the legal information that we're going to give you. I've got a couple asterisks on this sign just to denote that we are going to try to cover as much ground as possible, but any one of these topics could be sufficient for multiple days worth of workshops. So if there is something that you were really hoping to learn, we may or may not cover it today. Understand that we're casting a wide net here in hopes of giving out as much general information as possible. and then we can kind of drill down and point you in the right direction from there. Okay, so let's hit that first P, property. We want to make sure that you think about setting up your property correctly. Property, we're using very general as a term to refer to the things that you're owning and managing. A lot of times when you use the word property, we just think real property. Do you own a building? Do you own a home? But we're going to break that up and ask you to think about it a little bit differently. In terms of the business specifically, right? A legal entity designed to protect you. One of the first questions that we usually receive from someone who wants to start a business is, how do I actually start the business? How should I, what's called, incorporate an entity so that I get some benefit of legal protection? And what are the different entities and how do I choose between them? So let's start by covering that high level piece. If you are, for instance, a business in Florida, you should take a look at the Florida SunBiz website. Usually in any state, we're going to be looking at the corresponding Department of Corporations code, and we're going to want to get a sense of what different entity types even exist. For a small business in general, the types of advice that you're going to receive is usually that you should establish an LLC, limited liability company, not corporation. But there is a lot that goes into the analysis, which is why you'll find so much written about it online. And understand that in choosing the right entity type for you and your business, there are a couple different things you need to consider. The legal prong really has to do with the types of flexibility of the legal structure. If you're a corporation, we're a bit more formal, but we can do a little bit more creative things than we might be able to do with an LLC, where we might be a little limited. But either way, whether you're a C Corp or an LLC, you would get the benefit of what's referred to as a limited liability shield. So protecting you as an individual from the possibility of someone advancing, let's say, a lawsuit against you and being able to come after your personal assets. That's usually, an understanding of that concept is usually what drives most people to establish an entity in the first place. But what you want to understand is that no matter what type of entity you select, you have to run the entity and keep the appropriate paper trail in order to actually get the benefit of that limited liability shield. So there is a bit that you need to know there. For example, are you managing the entity's finances through your personal accounts? This might cause some trouble for you down the road if you needed to rely on an argument that your business and your personal assets should be kept separate if someone were to try to come after you in a lawsuit. And that piece there about the finances is something that you really want to consider. The other aspect that I mentioned to this consideration of what entity type you should select is an accounting and tax standpoint. Now, we are not accountants. I am not a licensed CPA at all, so I will stay in my lane, but we work a lot with accountants and CPAs, and we really recommend that you bring them into this conversation and think through the tax implications of the entity structure you're selecting. You may be in a situation where you've already selected an entity type. If that's you, that's okay. Understand that the knowledge and information here, both on the legal side of things and on the standpoint of the accounting and tax side of things, is helpful to you, even if you've already selected the entity type and registered with the state that you're in. You can close entities down. You can transfer the entity type and become a different entity if needed. So changes can be made. Don't worry about that. What you want to make sure that you're thinking through and being strategic on is why you're selecting a particular entity type. And there are a lot more things that go into that than simply, I'm selecting an entity type because somebody told me that's what I should do. So make sure that you're cognizant of that. But to make sure that we're not hiding the ball, I will say most freelancers that we're working with do happen to register as LLCs. I'm not saying that's necessarily right for you. But that's what we tend to see. And the rationale behind the LLC as your selection, as their selection as freelancers, a lot of times has to do with the ease of managing the LLC in comparison to other entity types. So that's entity selection. Let's dive a little further into other types of property. So we mentioned real property is one that seems obvious. A lot of freelancers and small business owners don't own actual physical property. They're maybe running their business online. They're using shared co-working spaces. And we want to be thinking about other types of assets. For example, your digital assets, the pictures you create, your website. Do you own the things you think you own? Needs to be a question that you can answer. What do I mean by that? If we think, for example, about your website, let's say you hired someone to create your website for you. Whether or not you own certain things on the website in terms of images and design are going to depend on a lot of different factors, right? The license underlying the photos. Who took the photos? Did you take them? Did someone else? What if you're in a situation where you work with a web design company and they use stock web templates and you see a copy, a duplicate of your website on a competitor page? What do you do in that instance? In that instance, the seminal document is going to be your contract that you had with this web designer. Is it possible that you gave permission for this web designer to do what they did and they're not violating any particular rule? To the extent that you are working with digital products, we want to make sure that you got ownership of them and that they're protected. And remember that as you're doing your write-up of assets and things you own, digital assets need to go into that category. And a lot of times with freelancers, for some reason, we see them look over this. Like for instance, I'm a photographer, one freelancer might say, and they don't realize that, their assets include all of the pictures that they take. And we want to make sure that you think through the process of selling your photos and this process to someone else and understand that in a very general sense, the creator of a thing owns the thing. Again, this is very general, but when you create something, you own it. And if someone is paying you for your creation, there has to be the appropriate transfer of this intellectual property as a work made for hire in order for that ownership to shift to someone else. And to the extent that that transfer isn't documented correctly, there may be a situation where a consumer has purchased something thinking that they own it and they don't actually own it. So again, we want to make sure that we consider this in the context of things we're creating, things we're purchasing for our business, our websites, and then of course your standard intellectual property buckets, your trademark, right? Your logo or any phrases that you're using with regard to your name. You are investing time, energy, money, creativity in building your brand. My question to you is, how are you protecting it? Do you have a trademark in place? Are you even able to obtain a trademark? A sad scenario that we've seen is a company spending time and money building out their name, building out their brand, eventually doing so well financially that they come to the realization they want to invest now in protecting what they've built. They want to make sure that, a competitor with the same name doesn't just pop up next to them, and they want to think through this and invest in it. The sad situation arises when our firm does the research to secure a trademark for them, only to find that the name that they've built out isn't actually something that they can protect in the way they'd like to protect it. So you really want to think through this sooner rather than later as you're working to build out your assets. Let's talk about that second bucket, papers. When I refer to papers, I'm referring generally to contracts. It is essential that business owners, whether you're a business of one or you're a business of 50,000, right? Solidify relationships in writing. Contracts are an essential part of business and in your daily life, whether you realize it or not. The truth is, you probably are more familiar with contracts than you care to realize. Most of us have seen a lot of the contracts that I've got written out here, right? We've seen terms and conditions on websites. Maybe we signed a contract when we purchased a car. We know what contracts are, and yet there is such a misunderstanding, confusion around what they do and when they're needed. And part of that comes from the fact that most people don't want to read a contract. And I get that. I'm a weird person who actually enjoys reading contracts. I love doing that. But most people have no interest in reading through the 10-point font, figuring out what it means. And so, as a result of such a strong desire to not do something that they hate, they just sign whatever they're given. And that's a really dangerous thing to do, because whether you read it or understand it or not, the chances of the contract being enforceable against you remain. And so contracts are really a good example of, not knowing something being able to come back and hurt you in a big way. So we want to make sure that we solidify our relationships in writing, and that we not only do that, we understand these papers, we understand the writings. So what I want you to do right now, if you haven't already done this, is just create a folder with all the contracts that are relevant to your business. And then let's put some subfolders in there, right? One with your contracts, and another with contracts that you've entered into on behalf of your business. Understand that when it comes to contracts, your contracts are the ones that should be most customized to you. When contracts are done by someone who knows what they're doing, it is a useful document that's highly intentional and customized to protect the business. So to the extent that you see or have someone else's contract, don't be confused into thinking that that's the best document for you. Contracts are not a one-size-fits-all solution. And understand there are some contracts that must be in writing. I've heard, clients refer to this idea of, an oral agreement, or what if my contract is written out on the napkin scenario. There's a lot of detail that goes into this, and there are certain types of transactions that must be in writing. And so to the extent you think you're safe because you have an oral agreement with someone, that may not actually be the case. So here you really want to understand the details. And a couple more things on contracts in general. To the extent that you are a do-it-yourselfer and you were to tell me, Kristen, I don't hate reading contracts. I enjoy that process and I really want to actively engage with it. I'd say to you, great. It's good of you to be invested in that way with your business and understanding the things that you're signing. A couple of high-level points about contracts. Usually, we're going to see contracts broken into two sections. One section is going to have the more substantive terms of the agreement. And then usually at the end of a contract, we'll see what's referred to as miscellaneous provisions or boilerplate provisions. Sometimes it's just called general provisions. Those pieces at the end are really important, and they do a lot of work to make sure that the contract is effective. So you want to make sure in your review that you're considering everything. And even though it might say miscellaneous, that doesn't mean important or not important or irrelevant. So everything that's written in that document is key. And you don't want to skip over really any pages or any sentences. You want to understand every piece of it. And also understand this about contracts. They are living documents when they're done correctly, meant to evolve as your company evolves and as the law changes. The fundamentals behind this, whether you're a lawyer or not, should make sense to you logically, right? Recently, with everything that has happened with COVID and the pandemic, there is a whole host of litigation and rules happening around how businesses transact and what happens when there is this sort of natural disaster type of situation. It's causing lawyers to rethink how they draft one essential miscellaneous provision called a force majeure provision, and old contracts as a result of these changes need to be updated to better protect the business. Some of our clients tell us, well, we don't need help with contracts. We have all of our contracts done, and they were done, really well by great lawyers. Say, okay, that's good. It's essential that you've got good contracts. But when were those contracts drafted? Oh, well, 10 years ago. You cannot update your contracts every 10 years and expect them to be effective for your business. Make sure you keep that in mind as you are working on contracts, signing contracts, and making sure that your company is protected. A couple of common questions that we get about contracts that are so common, I think they're worth bringing up here is, one, can I just copy a contract from Google? Or can I just copy a contract from a website of someone that does what I do? And won't that be good enough? It would allow me to save money, and then guess what? I've got a contract. So you can, but you should not, for some of the reasons that I already told you. When contracts are done correctly, they're customized. So to the extent you're copying someone else's contract, notwithstanding possible copyright issues with you making those copies, but notwithstanding that, you're wearing someone else's clothes. Maybe they'll fit you, but maybe they won't fit you as well as they should or could if you had them tailored to you and your specifications. Plus, to the extent you're copying a contract from the competitor, you don't know at what point in that competitor's business evolution the contract was drafted. So maybe you think our companies are identical, but if that contract was drafted at a time where the entity was not identical to what you're doing, things just won't match up. So we really don't recommend you copying contracts from Google, because you won't get the protection that you deserve and that your business should have to ensure it's protected. It's really every industry, right? The magic pill is a lot of times a waste of money that doesn't get you what you need to get to your end result. So to the extent we've had clients send us different providers that are selling legal services for, the free all-you-can-eat buffet pricing that causes a bit of an eyebrow raise, we tell those clients, we want you to do what you need to do and what's in your budget, but we also want you to be genuinely protected and not pay for something, even if it doesn't seem like a lot of money, that's not going to get you the help you need, and that's just going to be a waste of your money. So to the extent you find one of these miracle legal solutions, I'll just tell you that you want to take special care to read their disclaimers and read their terms and conditions. A lot of times, these miracle legal providers are not actually lawyers, and they're just selling you the opportunity to join a network. So make sure that you're really intentional and that you don't get scammed by folks who are selling you things that aren't actually going to help you. For freelancers in general, I want you to make sure to think through these types of agreements, understanding things like work for hire that we talked about before, and this concept of an intellectual property transfer. These provisions might be within a larger contract, or they could be stand-alone agreements. So you might come upon these things in different ways. We also want you to be thinking about waivers and disclaimer language. If you are, for example, a photographer, or if you're putting on events, what happens if someone is injured at one of those events, and what type of language do you have in place to protect you and protect the business? A big one, this is why it's got the asterisks there, is sales agreements. So you might see this in under different names, consulting agreements. In general, we're referring to a document that's detailing the provisions, the terms of a transaction. So we work with a lot of coaches, and let's say you're selling coaching services to your clients. That document that lists out the sale is really important for you, and it's probably one of the essential documents we'd recommend you not do business without. Even though we work with phenomenal coaches, phenomenal business owners, right? Working with clients, working with people, disputes tend to arise. And when a dispute arises, that document is going to be what we look to tell us what to do. We really want to think through what that means, and I'll talk about that a little further down the road. To the extent that you are selling professional services, whether it be coaching or something else, and you don't have a written contract to protect you and to protect your consumer who you're adding value to, that's not good, and you're not as protected as you should be. And simply sending an invoice is not enough, and it's insufficient to protect you. So make sure you think about that. And also terms and conditions, privacy policy, understand, most small businesses are working from a website. We want you to think through with great care and detail what the terms of that website say. And what we see a lot of times are folks using terms, privacy policy, again, contracts that they got from someone else, and they don't know what they mean. And at the point in time where they need to rely on those documents to be protected, they're not effective. Or worse, they are so bad that they actually hurt the business owner rather than help them. So to the extent that your website or your business has a bunch of documents that you're using over and over that you don't know what they mean, I really caution you to put them all in a folder somewhere, read them, and talk to somebody about them that can make sure those documents are effective to help you. And the last point really is to think about contracts, your contracts, as a shield. The more effective your contract is, the safer you and your business are. And one last point, because it comes up a lot and it came up for me recently. Clients say, I just want a simple agreement. I don't want you to over-lawyer it. This is like asking a lawyer to create for you an ineffective shield. Right? A good lawyer can help you strategize on what to do with your contract so that it doesn't inhibit the sales conversation or whatever your operational goal is, right? We're going to think through that problem with you. We're not trying to hurt your deals by injecting a 100-page contract. But if the document is, 15 pages, 20 pages, it's designed to be a thicker shield to protect you. If it's done correctly by people who know what they're doing, it's because they're trying to create for you a powerful, strong, effective shield. So asking for a simple contract is like asking for a weak shield before going into battle. All right, the third bucket that I want to make sure we have some time to cover is working with people. Now, some of the freelancers that we work with and maybe listening in may only be a team of one, and that's okay. When we think about working with people, we want to think about it in two contexts. So working with employees, people that are going to be salaried members of your team, working with independent contractors, and working with outside vendors. All of us, to the extent that we're running a business, for the most part, are working with people in some form or fashion. Some high-level takeaways with working with people: please understand there are state-level regulation, federal regulations that apply to employers. So you want to make sure that you're not violating any of those. And one that comes up a lot is the difference between an employee and an independent contractor. A lot of times, small business owners are not in a position, or feel that they're not in a position, to hire a full-time salaried employee. There's a lot of thought that goes into that. And so usually they think, well, I'll just have a lot of independent contractors. I'll pay someone on a project or hourly basis to complete a task that I need completed. To the extent you're working with independent contractors, though, it doesn't matter if you call them an independent contractor, or even a contract that you design calls them an independent contractor. That's not good enough to ensure that important agencies would also agree that your independent contractor is indeed an independent contractor. So what do I mean by this? A lot of times folks choose independent contractors because of the tax implications. We want to pass off these responsibilities to the independent contractor as a 1099 to handle themselves. If the IRS were to go back and audit you and come to the realization of their own accord, they have their own test, and different agencies have their own test for determining whether or not someone can accurately be defined as an independent contractor. If they're to determine that the individual is not an independent contractor, you are going to have to deal with the fallout of that. So you really want to make sure, to the extent you're working with folks in either capacity, that you understand the implications of that, and you understand the implications of what'll happen if some agency comes in and determines that your team of, let's say, 10 independent contractors should have been treated as employees, and you need to now go back and pay them accordingly. That can be a really scary situation to be in. So you want to make sure you can, to the extent possible, do your due diligence ahead of time. And if you are in a position where you realize, wow, my independent contractors really aren't independent contractors, then you want to talk with the right people to think through solutions for how you adjust and get that corrected as soon as you possibly can. To the extent you yourself are being treated as an independent contractor, you want to make sure you're looking at your independent contractor agreement that's given to you by another company, that you're asking appropriate questions in terms of compensation, and that you also understand that there is a difference between independent contractors, employees, and it won't matter if you call the IRS and say, don't worry about it, I'm good. I wanted to be an independent contractor. We're all okay. That won't matter. So you want to make sure, whether it's you hiring independent contractors or serving as one yourself, that you really understand the implications there. In terms of working with people, again, we want to be prepared to manage disputes. It is understood in business in general that we overestimate our relationships. Entrepreneurs are excited about what they're doing. You want to see the best in people. And a lot of times a criticism of lawyers is, well, you're negative and you are erecting, roadblocks to my vision, the reality that I want to build. So I want to shut you down, and then I don't want to hear, that negative voice. Good lawyers aren't negative. Good lawyers are excited about your vision with you, but they're also bringing to the table, they're bringing to your advisory board a different set of eyes. I myself have litigated in federal and state court. Our law firm, Corp Law, is a bit unique because we are a corporate firm that also actively engages in litigation, whether it's defending our business clients or advancing lawsuits on their behalf. And when you sit down and you talk to someone who has been involved in that process, and when they've seen a business deal go sour or they've seen a partnership fail, they are not trying to be negative, unless they're just a negative person, in helping you understand the pitfalls and the possibilities and the potential for dispute, the goal being to help you avoid the dispute. So we always want to think about what happens if there's a disagreement, if someone doesn't pay, if the 3 co-founders in my group decide that they disagree on an essential element of the business, then what? A lot of times, if your business is being run correctly, you'll have documentation spelling out what happens in that situation. But to the extent that you don't know, understand that disputes in the realm of the law exist on a spectrum. The different terms are thrown around by clients, and I think they don't always know what they mean. So I like to think of disputes, the lowest end of the spectrum, and usually the most cost-effective one is a simple negotiation. Something goes wrong, a client doesn't pay, you pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I provided a service, you didn't pay, let's work this out. Let's get something done here and taken care of. If that resolves it, then great, we're good to go. Above that is mediation. And mediation refers to a process where we're not formally in court and folks come together, usually both parties in the dispute and your mediator, oftentimes a retired judge or very experienced practitioner, to sort of moderate the dispute. Understand there is a cost component for mediation, so it costs money. A lot of times we see clients poach contracts from the internet. These contracts contain dispute resolution provisions. And the client might say, well, I don't ever have to worry about, paying for a lawyer in a lawsuit because my contract has an arbitration provision. That sounds very fancy. And then, we talk to the client, we explain to them, do you know that there is a cost associated with arbitration? We've worked on arbitrations that have cost upwards of $60,000, and the client is like, whoa, no, I didn't realize there was any cost component in terms of running through an arbitration, or that it's like a mini trial. So you want to make sure you understand that dispute resolution exists on a spectrum, and you can have some power and control and put some strategy and thought into, all right, if a dispute arises, and it happens, right? This is how I want to, as a business owner, this is how I want our company to navigate the dispute. Having that knowledge and thinking through it is empowering. So we want to make sure you understand it and that you're thinking through it rather than avoiding the topic on the hopes that you'll never run into a dispute with another person, because quite frankly, the chances of it happening for all of us are high. So the last tip there is just that. Be prepared to manage disputes both externally and internally to the extent that you start growing your team beyond yourself. Also, don't assume that just because you're working with family or a close friend that no dispute will ever arise. Some of the worst disputes I've ever seen happen to be between family members. And that's sad both for the business and for the family. So make sure you think through that and put a document into place as necessary to dictate what happens if something goes wrong. So we have covered a lot of ground. Thank you for bearing with me. I hope that I have not bored you and that we've made the topic of legal advice a bit sexier than usual. But I'm happy to look through the chat and see if there are any questions. I'm going to do that here now. Okay, so I see a note here. I won't say the name, but I'll just read the comment. So it was suggested that I start small, start as a freelance indie consultant, getting paid as a 1099 worker. Then, if it looks like the business will be a success, then form my entity. So my follow-up questions to someone like that would be, to a comment like that would be, when you say it was suggested, the quality and knowledge behind who suggested it matters. It's really convenient for all of us as business owners to take advice, but who we're taking advice from matters. So I would be curious to know if you got that advice from an attorney or from an accountant. From the legal standpoint, this idea of forming an entity with your state is there, again, to provide you one particular benefit that is often referenced, the limited liability shield. So the sooner you establish and incorporate the entity, whether you're starting very small or not, the sooner you get that benefit of the limited liability protection. So a follow-up question as well would be, what are your personal assets? Are you sitting on a substantial personal empire that you want to guarantee is protected? How important is that to you? If you were to tell me, well, it's quite important to me, then I'd say the sooner we get you incorporated, the better. Let's see, I think we've got one more comment here. Oh, this is a great question. All right. Probably difficult to generalize, but what advice would you give to an independent business owner in setting an annual budget for legal services? So this is a great question and a hard-hitting one, in that a lot of clients have this as their number one question they want to ask before talking to the lawyer. I don't even want to know your name. I just want to know, what do you charge? Understand that the price of legal services depend on a lot of different variables. So the market that you're in, the Miami market or a big city market anywhere, New York, California, is usually going to be a more expensive market than other more rural locations. So that will affect cost, as well as the experience of the practitioners and how much it costs them to operate their business. The way legal services are priced when done by law firms who know what they're doing actually have to do with the cost of operation, and they're tied to actual numbers rather than being a random fee assessment that's like pulled out of the sky, right? There's intentionality behind it when it's done correctly. In terms of the budget, like Kristen, exactly, I need an exact number. That is harder for me to say because I don't fully know what all your business needs to protect. If you are a small business of one, it might be easy to say, I don't need to invest in too much in terms of legal services. But if you're a business of one in a highly regulated industry, let's say you're doing, work in the financial advising space, work in terms of banking, work in terms of the solar industry in general, there are more regulations that you need to be aware of, whether you're a team of one or you're a team of 10. So I'd say, in terms of getting a sense of the annual legal budget, rather than thinking of it as a general number that I need to be aware of ahead of time, I'd say break it down into steps. First step is have a conversation with a business attorney. A lot of business attorneys charge for their consultations. Think of that as an investment to get, whether they charge or whether they don't charge. Think about investing your time and or resources and having a detailed conversation and doing what is a business checkup to see what you need to know. And then you can get a proposal from that firm or from other firms with regard to how much it'll cost to make sure that you're protected. And then you can work with that firm or the firm that you select to prioritize the legal needs from most important and most pressing, and then budget that out quarterly and go from there. So I realize that doesn't give you an exact number, but quite frankly, the number is highly variable based on market and based on your need. But to the extent that you've never had a conversation with a business lawyer, you don't even know the documents that you need, you want to start there and make sure that you do that assessment so that you can figure out the pricing from there. All right, so those are all the questions that I see. I am going to provide my contact information here and say that thank you so much for investing in yourself. I commend you for spending the time to learn about how to protect your business and the role that law plays in entrepreneurship. The fact that you're listening and learning is going to be crucial to your continued success. So well done. And to the extent that my firm can support you in any way, please feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to chat with you and think through how we can ensure that your business is protected. You've got all of our contact information here, and whether you're speaking directly with me or another member of our team, we love what we do and we genuinely enjoy working with small business owners. All right, I think we're waiting for our moderator to join us. So that's pretty much all I have to say, but I see another question just came through in the chat. So the question is, how often do standard documents need to be reevaluated? This one I can answer a little bit more directly than the last one. I'd say at least every year. So at least invest in and add to your calendar an annual review. But if there are some big developments in the world, for example, COVID-19, sooner than that. Or if there's significant adjustments in law, sooner than that. And your follow-up response as a CEO might be, well, I'm not paying attention to what's happening, in terms of local changes to the law or the law in general. This is a place where you want to align yourself with a legal team that's going to give you a call and tell you when one of those changes arise and have a knowledge and understanding of your business and your documents so that they can affirmatively tell you a big change happened. We need to get in there and pick apart some things to make sure that you're adequately protected. So most effective would be to be aligned with someone who's going to care enough about you and your protection to give you a call should things change. If you don't have a business lawyer in your corner or on your team of advisors, I'd say you need to at least do this annually.
I was muted, sorry. So those are all the questions we have. Thank you, Kristen. That was great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. If you really liked this session, make sure to vote for it so we can have it as one of the top sessions for the conference, and we can have it in a recap email. So if you don't have any other comments or questions, we're going to say goodbye and thank you for joining us for this Miami session, and see you soon. See you around.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.